Cartoon Network is a juggernaut for our nostalgic-minded brains. The network is impossible to miss when discussing nostalgia for the kids of the 90s and 2000s, and even the 2010s. With iconic shows being made one after another, it seemed like nothing could stop this network from creating peak content. Over the years, Cartoon Network has been one of the most creative and experimental TV networks out there, with their expansion into anime with Toonami, and of course the world of Adult Swim. Cartoon Network was the place for kids and animation enjoyers to feel included in the TV schedule, with 24-hour cartoon access as opposed to a small time slot on a major network. I hold Cartoon Network close to my heart as I have so many memories attached to the station, so today I want to do a deep dive on the over 30-year history of this beloved childhood pillar. So without further ado, here we go. I, Moffimoff, present to you the entire history of Cartoon Network. Before Cartoon Network launched in 1992, the world of cartoons on TV was drastically different. There was no single place dedicated to airing cartoons all day, every day. Instead, animation was scattered across various channels. For most kids growing up before the 90s, cartoons were a weekend ritual. Saturday mornings were sacred. Networks like ABC, NBC, and CBS filled their early weekend schedules with blocks of animated programming, airing classic shows aimed at young audiences like the Smurfs, He-Man, and Bugs Bunny, and of course reruns of the Flintstones. All of these were key figures each week. These Saturday morning cartoons became a cultural institution, a few hours of animated escape before the adult programming then resumed for the rest of the day. On weekdays, cartoons were primarily shown in after-school hours, typically from around 3 to 5 PM. These weekday syndication blocks featured some of the most iconic animated series of the 1980s, like DuckTales, G.I. Joe, and Thundercats. Most of these shows were often tied to toy lines, and in many cases their creation was just driven as a marketing stunt. That's why the show existed, so they could sell more toys. And we were also given a lot of shows that were based off movies that definitely were not for kids, like Rambo and RoboCop. Good times. Now, cable television was still growing back in the 1980s and early 90s, and it made cartoons hard to come by, but we were offered a few more options at the time. Nickelodeon, for example, started airing animated programs like Danger Mouse and Count Duckula, though its original animation wouldn't of course take off till the early 90s with the rise of Nicktoons. The Disney Channel also gave us an option. It focused more on reruns of classic animated shorts like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, and also the live action programming. Meanwhile, USA's network Cartoon Express became a reliable destination for reruns of Hanna-Barbera classics like the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, and the Jetsons, although it wasn't a dedicated animation network. The studios behind the pre-Cartoon Network animation era were industry staples like Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, and of course Warner Bros. Hanna-Barbera was the most iconic, known for churning out low-cost but memorable series, with limited animation and laugh tracks, which was a format that became the studio's trademark. Filmation produced many of the 1980s most iconic action cartoons, while Warner Bros. Continued to rely on its legendary Looney Tunes shorts, repackaged for modern television. It's also important to understand the limitations these cartoons operated under. Many were subject to heavy censorship, especially when it came to violence and mature themes like smirking. Animation was almost universally considered just for kids at the time, and programming reflected that. The technical quality of many cartoons was constrained by budget-limited animation. They recycled backgrounds and reused character movements, and also cut down on the frame rates, which was the norm at the time, and it was very noticeable. There was also no on-demand viewing, so if you missed your favourite show on a Saturday morning or after school, there was no streaming service or DVR to catch up with. VHS tapes offered limited access, but only for selected series and episodes, which were often really expensive and only in short volumes. In this environment, the launch of Cartoon Network in 1992 was nothing short of a miracle for kids' TV. It was the first ever 24-hour cable channel devoted entirely to animation, and one man is to thank for that: Ted Turner.
Should we give Elmo a bat?
Yeah!
Should we give Telly a bat?
Yeah!
Should we give Ernie a bat?
No! Ernie doesn't like the monsters!
In the early days of Cartoon Network, we saw Ted Turner's extensive library of classic MGM and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Cartoon Network gave these shows a new life and constant visibility. It was an instant success, and Cartoon Network was here to stay, but the network didn't want to be known as the rerun channel. So in 1993, we got Cartoon Network's first exclusive original show, The Moxie Show. The Moxie Show was an anthology show created by Hanna-Barbera. The show ran from December 5th, 1993 to May 25th, 1996, and it was also called The Moxie Pirate Show, and consisted of classic cartoons mixed in with Moxie the dog, who was voiced by Bobcat Goldthwait, and of course, Flea, who was a flea, who was originally voiced by Penn Jillette for some reason, I have no idea, but was then later replaced by Chris Rock. The show was clearly an attempt to create a mascot for the network, something kids could recognise instantly, like Mickey Mouse. But technically, The Moxie Show wasn't Cartoon Network's first original series. That goes to Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
You.
Space Ghost Coast to Coast was created in 1994 and used recycled Hanna-Barbera animation to create a parody talk show featuring live action guests including niche celebrities and figures from the counterculture movement at the time. The series was based on various inexpensive programming stunts to pull in viewers because the lack of original programming that they had to air on the network at the time, which led to the creative decision to repurpose existing content from the Turner library to make something new, which was very cost effective. This was a common theme for the network, as other shows on the network would follow the same technique, with shows like The Breck Show and C-Lab 2021. As I mentioned, the network had limited shows to its name in 1994, but something huge was about to happen that would launch Cartoon Network into the stratosphere. What a cartoon! The genius of What a Cartoon can be traced to one man, Fred Seibert. He was then president of Hanna-Barbera Cartoons. Seibert inspired by the creativity and freedom of the golden age of animation, where he saw directors like Chuck Jones and Tex Avery who were allowed to just innovate freely within short formats. Now Fred envisioned a return to creator-driven content. He believed that television animation just needed a break from the limitations imposed by corporate branding and tight toy company partnerships. He just wanted creators to create what they wanted and have the freedom to do so. Under Seibert's leadership, the studio launched a bold experiment. Instead of developing full series from top to bottom, independent animators and young creators would be invited to produce original animated shorts. Each creator was given the opportunity to write, direct, and oversee their own work. The idea was really simple. Every cartoon was a potential pilot, and the audience would help determine which ones deserved a full series. The project began under the name World Premiere Toons, debuting on February 20th, 1995. On Cartoon Network. It was later retitled What a Cartoon, but the mission pretty much remained the same, which was to showcase fresh original voices in animation. Over the next several years, the program would produce 48 shorts, many which became cult favourites, and several which exploded into full-fledged series that would help define Cartoon Network's identity in the early years and the rest of the decade. Unlike anything on television at the time, these cartoons were not limited by specific visual styles or demographics. Now one short might be really surreal and a slapstick comedy, while the next one could just be like a gothic horror parody or a sci-fi action rom-com or something. Everything was just completely off the wall, freedom to everybody. Because of this, it gave rise to some of the most memorable shows of the 1990s. Among the first batch of What a Cartoon shorts were several that would go on to shape the network. One of the earliest and most influential was Dexter's Laboratory, created by Genndy Tartakovsky.
Why do you do this? You're so stupid! Stupid, stupid, stupid! Oh, and let's not forget, you're so stupid!
With its unique animation style and humour, Dexter's Laboratory introduced viewers to a boy genius with a secret underground lab, which how did his parents not know that existed? Like, how much electricity did this kid use? The short was an immediate hit and was greenlit as a series in 1996, becoming Cartoon Network's first successful original show. Tartakovsky would go on to create Samurai Jack 2, and also work on Star Wars Clone Wars, which just cemented his place in animation history. Another standout, and my personal favourite, was the Powerpuff Girls, created by none other than Craig McCracken. The short was originally titled Whoop-a Stew, and the short featured 3 superpowered kindergartners, saving the city of Townsville from crazy, obscure random villains. McCracken's fusion of cute design with insane action made the short stand out just immediately, and in 1998, the Powerpuff Girls became a full series and one of Cartoon Network's biggest commercial successes, spawning merchandise, movies, and a reboot in 2016, which let's forget about that. Van Patable's Johnny Bravo also debuted in the same era. Now this show just centered on an Elvis impersonating Chad, I guess you could call him, who was constantly trying to pick up women and failing. The show stood out for its animation and its often adult humour, which is kind of to be expected, especially some of the writers for this show were people like Seth MacFarlane. You know, he made that small show called Family Guy, you've probably never heard of it. With this style of comedy, it made it a cult hit among older kids and teenagers. Now David Feast's Cow and Chicken took craziness and surrealism to new heights. It featured a cow and her chicken brother, raised by human parents who were only shown from the waist down. The cartoon leaned into the more Ren and Stimpy gross-out humour, which of course grew into its own show in 1997, and then had its own spin-off with Iron Weasel, which were 2 separate TV shows and series. Both of them really good, by the way. Another animator and creator who also made their mark was Butch Hartman. Butch of course is later known for The Fairly Odd Parents, but he did work on some early shorts. He worked alongside John R. Dilworth, who created the visually experimental The Chicken from Outer Space, which would then turn into Courage the Cowardly Dog, which premiered in 1999. Now what distinguished the What a Cartoon era from other animation style at the time was not just its variety, but its deliberate emphasis on unique artistic voices. Animators were encouraged to experiment with visual styles, the storytelling structure, the humour, the tone. It was just crazy. No matter what the storyline and plot was, it was always rooted in a love for the art of animation and a huge sense of individuality. The shorts kind of felt crazy and even a little risky for kids' TV. It was such a far cry from the heavily sanitized cartoons of the 1980s. The shows were not trying to appeal to a corporate checklist, but rather to the imaginations of the creators and the children watching. This format also demonstrated a deep respect for the audience. Cartoon Network trusted its viewers, who of course were kids. They didn't want to water things down for them, it was about giving creators space to express themselves and letting the viewers decide what resonated with them. By 1997, Cartoon Network began branding its slate of original cartoon shows as Cartoon Cartoons. This term applied for all the shows that were either emerged directly from What a Cartoon, or were stylistically aligned with its ethos. In 1999, the network launched Cartoon Fridays, a weekly programming block dedicated to premiering new episodes of these originals. It was hosted by the characters themselves in animated segments. The block was an instant hit, and further cemented the unique identity that had emerged from the What a Cartoon era. One of the last major success stories that came from What a Cartoon era was Ed, Edd and Eddy, which debuted in 1999. Although it was not a What a Cartoon short, it carried the same spirit. It was created by Dan Antonucci, sorry if I completely butchered that, who was a Canadian animator known for adult animation. This show was developed with complete creator control, something Cartoon Network had pioneered. The turn of the millennium marked a significant shift for Cartoon Network. Having established its creative identity during the What a Cartoon era in the mid to late 90s, the network now faced a new challenge: how to sustain and evolve that momentum. The years from 2000 to 2007 saw Cartoon Network move from fledgling creative powerhouse to a fully established entertainment brand. The short format began to phase out, the focus turned towards nurturing full series, and launching bold new blocks like Adult Swim and Toonami, which led Cartoon Network down a path to grapple with the question, how do they evolve while staying true to its roots? But by 2003, it was time to slow down. Some of the first generation hits began to end. Dexter's Laboratory concluded its original run in 2003, Johnny Bravo experienced quite a big shift as new directors and writers took over, but Ed, Edd n Eddy, however, proved to be the longest lasting of the bunch and continued through to 2009. Cartoon Network was not in danger heading into the 2000s because it gave us rise to several new key projects, like Samurai Jack, that was created by, of course, Genndy Tartakovsky.
No, master. Please forgive me. No.
Samurai Jack was a radical departure from anything that Cartoon Network had previously aired. The animation was simple, it was heavily inspired by cinematic action and had very little dialogue. The show was so respected and beloved that it actually earned an Emmy Award for animation. Also, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy premiered around this time. Now this show actually began as the winner of the network's Big Peak Weekend, which was a 2000s campaign where viewers voted on new pilots. It was created by Maxwell Atoms. The concept featured two kids who win a limbo game against the Grim Reaper. The show was a hit, which also broke off into its own little segment called Evil Konkani. These kinds of creative experiments showed Cartoon Network's continued commitment to letting creators push the boundaries. Some other shows that I think are definitely worth mentioning from around the mid-2000s era, of course, is Codename Kids Next Door, which was another Big Pick Weekend success. The series was created by Mr. Warburton, and it focused on a global network of kids fighting against the tyranny of adult authority. Kids Next Door was a major hit and ran for 6 seasons and had 2 movies. One of my personal favourites, of course, being Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which was created by Craig McCracken, fresh from the Powerpuff Girls. Foster's combined insane world building with great storytelling and genuine likeable characters. It was one of the first Cartoon Network shows animated with Adobe Flash, which definitely marked a shift in production methods. It became critically acclaimed and hugely popular, and it helped to define the mid-2000s Cartoon Network style. It would be wrong of me to talk about 2000s Cartoon Network without mentioning Toonami. Toonami was yet another pillar for Cartoon Network. Toonami was a block that began in 1997 but only found its voice in the 2000s. It had a signature host, Tom, which was voiced by Steve Blum. The block had some of the most unique promos that I've seen ever on a kids network. Toonami became the gateway to anime for millions of American kids. Shows like Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Tenchi Muyo, Naruto, and Gundam Wing became massive successes, defining a new generation for these fandoms. Toonami was more than just a programming block, it was a cultural movement. It became the place for action-oriented serialized storytelling in animation. Cartoon Network's success with Toonami also laid the foundation for future anime and adult-themed content to flourish, with the emergence of Adult Swim. Now, perhaps the most significant innovation of this period was the launch of Adult Swim on September 2nd, 2001. Originally airing on Sunday nights, the block catered to adults and older teens, featuring experimental and absurd content with much lower budget and fast production models. Many early hits of early Adult Swim is the aforementioned Space Ghost Coast to Coast, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, C-Lab 2021, The Brak Show, and Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law, and of course Her Movies, which is my favourite Adult Swim show of all time. These shows were crazy and often intentionally rude. The block gained a cult following almost immediately, becoming the #1 place for viewers who had grown up on Cartoon Network but now wanted edgier content. By 2003, Adult Swim had expanded to 2 weeknights and was one of the top rated cable programs for 18 to 34 year olds. Later Adult Swim would evolve to incorporate anime with shows like Cowboy Bebop, and we also got original dramas like The Boondocks. But in the early 2000s it was still finding its footing and redefining what animation could be for adult audiences. Adult Swim and Toonami needed to be mentioned, but they are a whole video in themselves. I could talk about them for ages, so stay tuned for the Adult Swim and Toonami deep dives. Around this time, Cartoon Network had also begun adapting to the digital era. Their website became one of the most visited entertainment destinations for kids. The website featured flash games that was based on the shows, and properties like Ed, Edd n Eddy and Foster's had entire game libraries built around the shows. In 2000, Cartoon Network also launched Cartoon Orbit, an early social network/game hybrid that allowed users to trade virtual C-tunes. Now, it does sound primitive by today's standards, but it was an innovative attempt at building interface fan communities online. Like I mentioned earlier, around the mid to late 2000s, Dexter's Lab and Johnny Bravo had either ended or gone under different writer staff, and that was no different for the rest of the shows. Powerpuff Girls ended back in 2005, with codenamed Kids Next Door following behind in 2008. New attempts at original programming struggled to find the same success. Flash animation was very successful, but it did lead to a lot of the shows looking the same stylistically. The Cartoon Cartoons label was officially retired in 2004, and the beloved Cartoon Fridays block was cancelled that same year. Though the shows themselves continued, the branding that had defined the first decade of Cartoon Network's original animation had come to an end, leading us towards the dark period for the network. By the late 2000s, Cartoon Network was undergoing a major leadership transition. In 2007, Stuart Snyder was appointed president and COO of Turner Broadcasting's Animations division. He came into the role during a very transitional moment for the network. Many of the signature cartoons had ended or had started winding down. Around the late 2000s, in 2008 to 2009, Ed, Edd n Eddy and Foster's was wrapping up their final seasons, and newer shows like Chowder and Flapjack weren't getting the same heights as previous shows, despite both of them being so goddamn good. Competition began to rise with networks like Nickelodeon, who had massive live-action hits like iCarly, Drake and Josh and Zoe 101. And even Disney Channel had become a powerhouse with Hannah Montana, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, and the High School Musical trilogies. These networks dominated the tween demographic, with relatable live-action content. Snyder and his team wanted to reposition Cartoon Network as a more general youth entertainment brand. Not a place just for cartoons, but a place for kids' content, which, when your network is called Cartoon Network, that's pretty difficult to get rid of, the cartoons. The result was CN Real, a block of live-action reality game shows designed to compete directly with Nickelodeon and Disney. Oh boy, CN Real. Here we go. CN Real officially launched in June 2009 and ran in various formats through that year and into early 2010. It featured entirely live-action reality-style content, which was a huge departure from the network's foundational mission. Some of the key shows from around this time featured Destroy, Build, Destroy. This show was hosted by Andrew WK. This show pitted two teams of teenagers against one another. They had to destroy machines, then rebuild new ones from the wreckage to complete in challenges. It was kind of like Mythbusters meets BattleBots, but for kids. Now, despite the unusual premise, this was probably one of the most successful CN Real shows, and actually ran for 3 seasons from 2009 to 2011. Another was Dude What Would Happen. This show followed a group of teenagers conducting wild experiments, often science-based or stunts like what would happen if you microwaved a snowman, which, spoiler alert, it would melt. The tone was hyperactive and goofy, and it was kind of trying to emulate Jackass meeting a science fair type energy. It too did last multiple seasons, but it was critically panned for being just low effort and very condescending. Brain Rush was a game show set on a roller coaster, hosted by Lamorne Morris, whoever that is. Contestants had to answer trivia questions whilst riding a roller coaster, and it lasted just 6 episodes, probably because it sounds like shit. The Other Siders was a kid-friendly take on ghost hunting. A group of teens used scientific methods to explore haunted locations. It aimed to blend paranormal thrills with the appeal of shows such as Are You Afraid of the Dark? But that failed immensely. Another one I remember was Survive This, which was a Canadian import that put teens into survival scenarios in the wilderness, so pretty much just to show Survivor. Have I persuaded you that CN Real was good? No. Oh, because yeah, it wasn't. There was a lot of reasons why Cartoon Network's viewers were furious, and they were pretty clear and valid. Cartoon Network was by name and tradition a home for animation. Fans who had grown up with the network trusted it to deliver unique animated shows. They felt pretty alienated. Why is this on Cartoon Network became a rallying cry across the internet forums and fan sites. Most CN Real shows were widely considered just low-effort knockoffs of already successful programs. Destroy, Build, Destroy and Dude What Would Happen in particular were criticised for having cringe-worthy premises and very uncharismatic hosts. Which is definitely not true. Andrew WK has some bangers under his belt, leave the guy alone. In 2009, Cartoon Network wasn't just adding live action, it was actually becoming live action. It was cutting back on cartoons. Several promising animated pilots got shelved, and Cartoon Network's investment in new original animation slowed dramatically, which this was devastating for people who had grown up on the Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Laboratory. After a while, CN Real began quietly vanishing from the schedule by early 2010. Most of its shows were cancelled after just one season, despite the ones that I had mentioned, because they had very little fanfare. Critically, CN Real failed to attract a new audience, and alienated the ones that it had already had. They hoped to catch up with Nickelodeon and Disney, but it just didn't generate any real buzz or any long-term fans who were demanding to see these shows brought back. Everyone is glad that this doesn't exist anymore. After CN Real, it was looking pretty damn bleak for Cartoon Network heading into the 2010s, but little did we know, a revival like no other was starting to brew. Stuart Snyder, who had overseen CN Real, quietly shifted the network's focus back to animation, and Cartoon Network's chief content officer, Rob Salcher, decided to get a new approach, give more opportunity to young creators with distinctive voices. Where have we heard that before? The pivot just didn't bring the network back to animation, it redefined the tone and ambition of the Cartoon Network shows. The new series weren't just funny or weird for the sake of it, they were really personal, and had very emotionally engaging storylines, and they came to define an entire generation of TV. And it all starts with Adventure Time. When Adventure Time premiered on April 5th, 2010, it marked a huge moment, not just for Cartoon Network, but for modern animation. The show was created by Pendleton Ward. The show had started as a 2007 short on Nickelodeon's Random Cartoons, but it was passed over, a huge mistake on Nickelodeon's part. Cartoon Network saw this and greenlit the series instead. At first glance, Adventure Time just seems like a silly fantasy about a boy named Finn and his dog Jake, exploring the colourful post-apocalyptic world. But when you actually watch the show and start to understand it, beneath its innocent surface is something deeply unique. Unlike shows we saw before it, it had emotional maturity. Characters grew older, relationships changed, and trauma had consequences. The land of Ooo had a hidden post-apocalyptic backstory involving a mushroom war. Now, the episodes of Adventure Time could vary drastically from a really quiet, chill episode to an action-packed, chaotic mess of an episode which is so good to watch. Now, Adventure Time quickly became a critical and commercial success, attracting not just kids, but teens, college students, adults. It really showed that animated TV could be as rich and layered as a prestige drama. The success of Adventure Time empowered other creators and inspired future shows like Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, and Over the Garden Wall, and my personal favourite from this era, Regular Show. Premiering just a few months after Adventure Time, Regular Show was created by J.G. Quintel and offered a totally different turn, but the same level of originality. Regular Show stars two underachieving 23-year-olds, Mordecai and Rigby, who work at the local park. The show is a classic. It has a really good trait of just being very relatable at the start, with sudden bursts of just animated insanity, which could feature things like video game battles, death metal gods, and time-travelling vending machines. One thing that Regular Show does that I really admire is it really bridged the gap between kid and adult humour, without kind of compromising each other. The show is perfect for both ages. kids and parents could watch at the same time and get the same enjoyment but for different reasons. It used realism to reflect issues like burnout, romance, jealousy, and friendships. It did quietly age its characters across seasons, and culminated in probably one of the greatest cartoon finales of all time. It attracted a huge older audience, particularly teenagers who felt like they had aged out of other kids' cartoons. And also, it's coming back to Adult Swim. Yes, let's fucking go! Another great show was The Amazing World of Gumball. Created by Ben Bockley, I think that's how you pronounce his name. This show took place in the fictional town of Elmore, where all characters were different types of animation. 2D, 3D, CGI, puppetry, photos, etc. It was the first Cartoon Network series produced out of Europe by Cartoon Network Studios Europe. The show was known for its groundbreaking animation and the mixed media styles that clashed and coexisted in every animation frame. Now, while it started off aimed at younger viewers, its writing and its visuals made it a cult hit with animation fans of all ages, and it just got more and more popular, becoming one of Cartoon Network's most streamed shows on TV, which is getting more episodes this year. Let's fucking go! Steven Universe was created by Rebecca Sugar, the first woman to independently create a Cartoon Network series, by the way. Steven Universe was a landmark show in numerous ways. It blended anime influence, deep lore and musical theatre into something completely new. Steven's journey as a half-human, half-gem mirrored the LGBTQ+ themes and discussions around self-discovery and acceptance. This show featured openly gay characters, which was extremely groundbreaking for kids' TV, which made it critically acclaimed and culturally significant. Steven Universe helped shift the industry towards more emotionally inclusive storytelling. Now, some other series around this time included Clarence, which Clarence was fantastic. It was such a down-to-earth show, just about a kid named Clarence in the neighbourhood and his friends. It focused on everyday adventures, and just really was such a nostalgic show that brought back memories from my childhood. It was the complete opposite of a show like Over the Garden Wall, which was groundbreaking miniseries created by Patrick McHale, who was a former writer on Adventure Time. This was a gothic, I guess you could say, fable about two brothers lost in a mysterious forest. It became one of the most acclaimed animated series ever produced, despite only being 10 episodes long. If you haven't watched Over the Garden Wall, you have to check it out. It is absolutely amazing. We also had Uncle Grandpa, which sucked. This era of Cartoon Network also coincided with the explosion of Tumblr, YouTube and online fandoms. Shows like Adventure Time, Steven Universe and Gumball developed devoted online communities who created fan art and analysed lore. Cartoon Network leaned into this with web shorts, exclusive online content and even sanctioned fan engagement. Now, the interplay between TV and internet culture became a key part of Cartoon Network's success in 2010. They even acknowledged this so much that the episode of Gumball, where that character just ships everybody together, just being one of these fans on Tumblr and DeviantArt, it was really cool that Cartoon Network acknowledged this kind of world. Though traditional ratings weren't what they used to be, Cartoon Network shows during this era became iconic, with kids who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s. Adventure Time was nominated for Emmys, Peabodys, and became a merchandising empire. Steven Universe won a GLAAD Media Award. Over the Garden Wall won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2015, and Regular Show was nominated for multiple Primetime Emmys. These shows also generated long-tail success via streaming, merchandise, and proving that high-quality animation had value far beyond the TV ratings. Cartoon Network's rebound wasn't just about good shows. It was about a new kind of studio culture that the network embraced. Animation was no longer just for laughs or action. It became a medium for exploring sadness, growth, love, fear and joy with nuance and honesty. As the 2020s progressed, Cartoon Network found itself navigating not only a rapidly evolving entertainment landscape, but a deep internal identity crisis. Now, it was once known for the gold standard for creator-driven animation. Cartoon Network entered this decade riding the final wave of its previous success. But by 2025, its form and cultural status have been fundamentally altered. This half-decade would prove to be the most tumultuous and defining period in the network's long-storied history. Cartoon Network began to struggle in the face of streaming disruption, corporate consolidation, and industry-wide contraction. Cartoon Network became both a cautionary tale and a symbol of resilience. Now, what remained by 2025 was not the same Cartoon Network that launched Dexter's Laboratory or even Adventure Time. It was a very fragile form of itself, one that still fought, however, quietly to keep the spirit of its legacy alive. In many ways, the unraveling for Cartoon Network began in 2022, with the merger between Warner Media and Discovery Inc. to form Warner Bros. Discovery. Cartoon Network Studios, the creative zone responsible for some of the most beloved animated shows of the past 2 decades, was quietly absorbed into Warner Bros. Animation. This was not a mere reshuffling, it did mark the end of Cartoon Network as a creative force. The studio that once championed experimental, emotional, complex storytelling was now confined by corporate greed that viewed animation as just another content category, nothing special. It was driven by branding and cost cutting, not innovation. In an effort to reduce expenses, Warner Bros. Discovery began pulling content from its streaming platforms, most notably HBO Max. This included over 70 shows and specials, many of which were CN originals, such as Infinity Train, OKKO Let's Be Heroes, and Mau Mau Heroes of Pure Heart. These were not retired or cancelled, they were just removed without warning, effectively wiping them from existence in a digital space. The creators were not even informed, and fans lost legal access to entire series overnight, which I have a solution to that, by the way. This move caused outrage amongst artists and audiences alike. Cartoon Network had spent years cultivating a reputation for nurturing creator-led storytelling. Now it was associated with just disposability and the devaluation of art. The hashtag Cartoon Network is not dead trended, not as a reassurance, but as a rallying cry, a desperate attempt to find something for this fading institution. While Cartoon Network technically continued to operate as a TV channel through the mid-2020s, its purpose had become very unclear. Without the ability to greenlight and develop its own shows independently, and with much of its core staff now gone, Cartoon Network devolved into something closer to a programming block or a brand label rather than a full-fledged network. Now, the daily schedule just leaned heavily on its legacy hits, reruns of Teen Titans Go, Gumball and We Bare Bears, while newer projects either premiered directly to Max or aimed at international markets. The once vibrant identity of Cartoon Network had been reduced to a shadow. It was still present, still technically functioning, but creatively neutered, and it was just completely structurally diminished. Some of the final torchbearers of Cartoon Network's original spirit did persist during this era. Shows like Craig of the Creek became one of the most critically praised shows in the network's recent history, or its more preschool spin-off, Jessica's Big Little World. Meanwhile, long-running series like The Amazing World of Gumball continued to enjoy life through reruns and development of a movie, which, at this point, the movie is not existing and instead we're getting a new series. The abrupt removal of beloved content from streaming platforms sent a chilling message across the industry. Not only were these shows no longer being produced, they were actively being erased. By 2025, Cartoon Network no longer resembles the Maverick. It still exists, but more as a legacy brand, a shell used for merchandising, social media, nostalgia posts, and the occasional reboots. New shows were still produced under the Cartoon Network label, but few had cultural impact or freedom of their predecessors. Creators who had once found Cartoon Network to be a launching pad for bold visions had moved elsewhere. They'd gone to Netflix or to indie animation platforms, to YouTube or to Patreon, or just completely left the industry entirely. The dream of Cartoon Network being this huge juggernaut of animation, for all practice and purposes, has been dismantled. What is clear, however, is Cartoon Network changed animation forever. It made space for the weird, the emotional, and the unconventional. It believed in its artists, and for over 2 decades, it proved that cartoons weren't just for kids, that they were for everybody. Cartoon Network is more than a brand. It's a memory of after-school reruns and constant late nights watching Adult Swim when you shouldn't have been. From the crazy anarchy of What a Cartoon era to the poignant minimalism of Steven Universe, it was always way more than television. In 2025, as the media landscape continues to evolve, Cartoon Network stands both as a cautionary tale and a beacon. Its decline reminds us of the dangers of corporate greed, and how fragile art can be in an era dominated by algorithms. But its legacy and the community it built remain a testament to what's possible when artists are trusted to lead their own shows. Even if the channel never returns to its former glory, its spirit lives on, in every risk-taking animated series, in every independent creator who grew up watching it and taking inspiration from it. And one thing that we're definitely sure of, Cartoon Network can never be taken away from us, no matter how hard they try. As long as people keep talking about it, Cartoon Network will stay in our memories forever. And ladies and gentlemen, that was the entire history of Cartoon Network. This video has been so much fun. I have enjoyed making this video so much. I've found so many cool little bits and bobs when editing, just so many cool things. Deleted scenes from cartoons that got cancelled, and also got to enjoy the nostalgic ride from the What a Cartoon era. Everything about this video I enjoyed so much. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching to the end. I can't thank you enough. If you'd like to see more content, make sure to leave a like and a subscribe. I'm close to 100 subscribers, so if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, press that subscribe button, that's the only way you're going to see it. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.